Welcome back, deep divers. Today we're taking a plunge into a topic a lot of you have been asking about, email authentication fraud. We've got this really intriguing document simply titled Pasted Text. And let me tell you, it's a deep rabbit hole.
It really highlights how this goes way beyond just, annoying spam in your inbox. We're talking about the potential to, really undermine trust online, impacting everything from banking to business communication, even just personal relationships.
Exactly. I mean, imagine getting an email that looks exactly like it's from your bank, but it's not. Or what about a message that seems to be from your boss, asking for something urgent, but it's actually a scammer?
That's where email authentication comes in. It's basically a system that tries to verify if an email is actually from who it claims to be. There are a bunch of tools that help with this, like SBF, DKIM, and DMRC.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't tech wizards, break that down a bit. What are those?
Yeah. Well, imagine SBF is like the bouncer at a club, checking IDs to make sure everyone coming in is legit. DM is like adding a special seal or a stamp to a document, making it way harder to forge. And then DMRE is like the club owner, laying down the law and saying, here's how we're going to handle anyone who tries to sneak in without following the rules.
I love those analogies. So when these systems are in place, they help prevent someone from just slapping a fake sender address on an email and tricking us, right?
Exactly. It makes it much harder to impersonate a legitimate sender.
But our source makes it pretty clear that the bad guys, the scammers and hackers, they're always coming up with new ways to try and outsmart these systems. That's where we get into the different types of email authentication fraud.
Right. Let's start with one that's particularly interesting and costly. Business email compromise, or BEC. This one's all about causing financial damage, but it also relies heavily on psychological manipulation, which is fascinating.
You mentioned that BEC scammers often try to impersonate authority figures, like CEOs or managers. Why is that tactic so effective? What makes us so likely to fall for it?
Well, think about it. We're kind of conditioned to trust those in positions of power, right? We're used to responding to directives from our bosses or people we see as experts. BEC scammers exploit that by posing as someone we're likely to obey without question.
So it's not just about hacking into systems. It's like they're hacking human nature.
Precisely. And the document even points out how they use things like urgent language and threats to create a sense of panic, to pressure their victims into acting without thinking things through.
That makes a lot of sense. When we're stressed or feel rushed, we don't always stop to question things, even if something feels off.
Exactly. And the consequences can be huge. We're talking businesses losing millions of dollars, sometimes even going bankrupt.
It's a stark reminder that this isn't just about technology. It's about understanding how people think and behave. Okay, so let's move on to a tactic that often underpins a lot of these scams. Email spoofing. Have you ever gotten an email that just seemed, a little off? Like maybe it looked like it was from your bank, but something just felt wrong.
Oh, absolutely. We've all been there. That's often spoofing in action, where attackers manipulate the email header to make it look like the message is coming from someone you trust, when it's really not.
So even if you're usually good at spotting things like misspellings or weird links, spoofing can make it much harder to tell what's real and what's a trap.
Right. It's like someone wearing a really good mask. They might look familiar, but underneath, it's a totally different story.
Okay, so how do we defend against that?
Well, those security measures we talked about earlier, SPF, DKIM, and especially DMRC, can help catch some spoofing attempts. They're like having a more vigilant bouncer at that club, someone who's really scrutinizing everyone who tries to come in.
Gotcha. So spoofing kind of sets the stage, and then we get into more familiar territory. Phishing and spear phishing.
Right. Those are all about tricking people into giving up sensitive information, like passwords or credit card numbers.
So phishing is like those generic emails we all get, claiming we've won the lottery or need to update our account info. They just cast a wide net, hoping to catch anyone who might be gullible enough to click.
Exactly. But spear phishing is more targeted. It's like a sniper rifle instead of a shotgun. Attackers tailor the message to a specific person or organization, using information they might gather from social media or company websites to make the email seem more convincing.
Oh, wow. So they might even mention details about a recent purchase you made or a project you're working on to really make you believe it's legitimate.
Exactly. The document actually gives a really chilling example of a spear phishing attack targeting a company's financial department. The attacker impersonated a vendor requesting a wire transfer, and because they included specific details about a recent transaction, the email seemed totally legit.
And they fell for it.
Unfortunately, yes.
Stories like that are really scary because they show that even with strong security measures, the human element is always a factor.
You're absolutely right. It doesn't matter how strong your defenses are if someone makes a mistake or falls for a clever trick.
Okay, so this next one really plays on our tendency to skim information,
Yeah.
especially when we're busy. Domain spoofing and lookalike domains.
Oh, yeah, this one's sneaky.
I'm looking at an example from the document, and it's amazing how subtle the differences can be. Like, the real domain is example.com, but the spoofed version is examp1e.com. They literally use the number 1 instead of the letter L.
Exactly. They might use hyphens, extra letters, different domain endings, anything to make it look close enough to the real thing that you might not notice.
So what's the key takeaway here? How do we avoid falling for this?
First, always double check the sender's email address. Look for anything that seems even slightly off, no matter how small. Second, get in the habit of hovering your mouse over any links before you click them. That'll show you the actual URL and help you make sure it's going where you expect.
And if something feels even a little bit suspicious,
Don't hesitate to verify the request through another channel, like calling the company directly or checking their official website.
great advice. Okay, so this next one is kind of a worst case scenario. Compromised email accounts with no email authentication.
Yeah, this is where things can get really messy.
So what happens when an account that's actually real gets taken over by a hacker?
Well, if that account doesn't have proper email authentication set up, it basically becomes a weapon the attacker can use. They can send phishing emails to the account owner's contacts, request money transfers disguised as legitimate requests, even use it to compromise other accounts.
Yikes.
This is why strong passwords and two-factor authentication are so crucial.
The document really emphasizes that.
It's like having a second lock on your door. Even if someone manages to pick the first one, they're still stopped by the second.
Makes sense. Now, this next tactic, credential stuffing and password reset scams, really highlights something important about data breaches. You know, we hear about them all the time in the news, but it can feel very abstract until it hits close to home.
Absolutely. When attackers steal usernames and passwords from one website, they often try to use that information to break into accounts on other platforms. That's credential stuffing.
So they're basically taking those stolen credentials and running them through every online service they can think of, hoping to find a match.
Exactly. And if you happen to have used the same password across multiple accounts, and one of those accounts was involved in a data breach, well, you can see how that could be a problem.
Definitely not ideal. And then there are password reset scams, where attackers try to exploit flaws in account recovery processes to gain access to your account.
Right. They might intercept password reset emails, pretend to be you to request a password change, and then boom, they've hijacked your account.
Again, two-factor authentication can really help in that situation.
Absolutely. It makes those types of attacks much harder to pull off.
Okay, let's move on to a tactic that I think most people are at least somewhat aware of: malicious attachments and malware delivery. We all know to be wary of clicking on suspicious links, but attachments can be just as dangerous, right?
Oh, absolutely. That seemingly harmless PDF or Word document could be hiding all sorts of nasty surprises.
And they'll often use social engineering tricks to entice you to open them, like an email that says, hey, check out this invoice for your recent purchase, when you know you haven't bought anything recently.
Exactly. They play on your curiosity, your urgency, or even your fear.
So what can we do to protect ourselves?
Well, first, make sure you have a good anti-malware program installed and keep your software up to date. That's your first line of defense.
And then, just like with suspicious links, be extra cautious about opening attachments from unknown senders, or even those that seem slightly off, even if they're from someone you know.
Right. If you have any doubts, reach out to the sender through another channel to confirm its legitimacy.
Makes sense. We've covered a lot of ground here, from BEC to spoofing to malicious attachments. It's clear that email authentication fraud is a complex and constantly evolving threat. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all the ways things can go wrong, but before we get too discouraged, let's talk about what we can do to protect ourselves. The pasted text document provides some excellent prevention strategies, and I'm really looking forward to digging into those with you.
Absolutely. It's important to remember that we're not powerless in the face of these threats. Knowledge is power, and by understanding the tactics and implementing the right preventative measures, we can significantly reduce our risk.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's dive into those prevention strategies. Where do we even begin?
Well, the document starts with the foundation: implementing strong email authentication. We've talked a lot about SPF, DKIM, and DMRC. They're not just, techie buzzwords. They're your first line of defense.
Right. If you're a business owner, setting these up is non-negotiable. It's like you wouldn't leave the doors to your store wide open, would you?
Definitely not, unless I was going out of business and giving everything away for free. And speaking of giving things away, we mentioned two-factor authentication earlier. Might seem like a hassle, but it adds a huge layer of security.
Absolutely. Think of it as having a security guard checking IDs at the entrance to your business. Even if someone has a stolen key, they can't get in without the right credentials.
I love that analogy. So, next up, educating employees and users. This seems super important, especially for businesses, but even individuals need to be aware of these threats.
Right. It's all about creating a culture of security awareness. Our source talks about training programs that teach people how to spot phishing attempts, how to recognize a suspicious email, and how to report anything that seems off.
So instead of just saying, don't click on that,
Sure.
give people the knowledge to understand why they shouldn't and how to identify those red flags.
Exactly. Make it interactive, use real-world examples, almost like a game.
Ooh, I like that. Maybe a spot the fishy email challenge. Okay, what about monitoring for lookalike domains? That sounds pretty technical.
It's definitely something businesses should be proactive about. There are tools that can monitor for domain impersonation and alert you if someone registers a domain that's suspiciously similar to yours.
So if someone tries to set up examp1e.com to trick my customers, I'll get a heads up.
Exactly. And you can report it, get it taken down, prevent a potential attack before it even happens.
That's amazing. It's like having a digital watchdog on the lookout for anyone trying to misuse your brand.
Okay, what about advanced email filtering? Is that just a fancy spam filter?
It's more than that. These systems use machine learning and other technologies to analyze emails for suspicious signals. They can detect patterns, analyze the sender's reputation, even scan attachments for potential threats.
Wow. So it's like having a whole team of security experts working behind the scenes.
Pretty much. And it's not just about blocking obvious spam. These systems can catch phishing emails that might slip through traditional filters.
Gotcha. That's really reassuring. Okay, last but not least, our source recommends encouraging verification of requests. This goes back to that human element, right? Absolutely. It's about empowering people to question anything that seems unusual, especially if it involves sensitive information or money. Don't just blindly follow instructions in an email. Pick up the phone and call the sender to confirm.
So if my boss emails me asking for an urgent wire transfer, I should verify that directly even if the email looks legit.
Always, it's better to be safe than sorry.
That's great advice. It really reinforces the idea that we're not just passive recipients of emails. We have the power to question things and double-check.
Exactly. Security is a shared responsibility. By combining strong technical measures with smart human practices, we can create a much safer online environment.
Well said. This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. We've learned so much, from the technical details of email authentication to the psychological tactics used by these fraudsters. And honestly, I'm feeling a lot more confident about navigating the digital world safely.
Me too. It's amazing how these seemingly technical topics are so intertwined with human behavior.
Absolutely. And that, my friends, is what makes cybersecurity such a fascinating and ever-evolving field. I got to say, we started this deep dive feeling, a little overwhelmed by all the different ways email authentication fraud can happen.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
But now I feel like I'm walking away with a lot more knowledge and the tools to actually protect myself.
That's the goal, right? Turning information into action. Even small steps can make a big difference.
Absolutely. Before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've talked about, the tech side of things, the psychology behind these scams, and all the ways to stay safe. But what about the bigger picture?
What do you mean?
Well, we rely on email for so much these days, right? Communication, business, keeping in touch with friends and family. As these fraud tactics get, more and more sophisticated, how do you think that's going to change our whole relationship with email?
That's a good question. I mean, will we all become super cautious, suspicious of every message that lands in our inbox?
Or maybe we'll see, like completely new technologies emerge that change how we authenticate and trust digital communication.
It's hard to say for sure, but one thing's for certain. This battle between the good guys and the bad guys, the ones trying to protect us online and the ones trying to exploit us, it's not going away.
And we all have a role to play in that, staying informed, adapting our behavior, and pushing for better security measures.
Absolutely.
Well, folks, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of email authentication fraud. A huge thank you to you, our listeners, for joining us on this journey. We hope you learned a thing or two and feel better equipped to navigate the digital world safely. Until next time, happy diving.